Before we get into this video, I want to say a massive thank you to you. This week we are celebrating our 6th birthday at Beyond, and so I want to say thank you to those of you who serve, to those of you who give. I want to say thank you to those of you who have stopped by this channel in the last 18 months or so that we've had it up. And we had a really simple goal 6 years ago when we started Beyond. What we wanted to do was to remove every unnecessary barrier that stood between someone who was trying to find and follow Jesus. And if that's you right now, maybe one of the big barriers that stands in the way of you following Jesus is the Bible. And if you've ever felt like the Bible is a barrier to you following Jesus, then come on this journey with us for the next couple of episodes, because I want to help you understand the story of the Bible. Come on, guys. It's time to go. This is the bit where we transition. The reason I want to help you better understand the Bible is because we all have an understanding of the Bible. If you didn't grow up in church, you have an understanding of the Bible. If you grew up, are you filming me or the dog? And a lot of us might have heard Bible stories. Maybe if you grew up in church, you heard Bible stories about David and Bathsheba and Samson and Delilah and Jesus turning water into wine. And even if you didn't grow up in church, maybe you heard stories of the Bible. You heard about a guy who crammed a whole bunch of animals in an ark, and you're not actually sure where this story is in the Bible, but there's something about 10 commandments. And while people have heard Bible stories, a lot of people haven't heard the story of the Bible. And this is really important, especially if you're watching this video and you're skeptical about Jesus or the Bible or faith and you don't know where you stand on it. And the reason it's so important is because if you don't understand the story of the Bible, you're less inclined to believe the stories in the Bible. And here's the problem why so many people unnecessarily resist faith. Let me show it to you. How we got our Bibles is not how we got the Bible. This is my Bible. I got it in 2009. It's 12 years old, which is why the cover's so disheveled. But how we got our Bibles is not how we got the original Bible. See, this Bible comes in a nice leather-bound case. For whatever reason, Bibles love to have gold edges on the pages. It's got a bookmark so you can keep track of your places. A table of contents, there's maps at the end. All the books are neatly put together and they've got chapter and verse. And for some of you like me, you were given a Bible like this really young. And maybe you were told, hey, don't question anything in it. It's the Word of God. And maybe when you started to question it, you said, so why should I do that though? Someone said to you, well, if the Bible says it, that settles it. For others of you, maybe you heard that, but then you discovered Google or you discovered YouTube and you discovered what else is in the Bible. You discovered those verses and those parts that no person in church would talk about, no Jesus follower would talk about. And if you've ever felt like walking away from faith, or if you've walked away from faith because of something that's in the Bible, I want to invite you back. And I want to invite you to maybe something you didn't know, that the story of the Bible doesn't begin in the beginning. In fact, it begins on the back half of the middle. It begins with a guy called Luke, who's actually a doctor, and he's not a Jewish doctor, he's a Greek doctor. Let me introduce you to Luke. And Luke is writing an account for a friend of his called Theophilus. And the reason Theophilus wants an account written is because he's heard the stories of Jesus. But he wants a document that he can refer to that's investigated through. And this is how Luke begins his letter to Theophilus. He says, many people have set out to write an account about the events that have been fulfilled among us. Now, this was in itself unique for the first century because Luke says many people have done this. And in the first century, not many people would write about the same event. So this tells us something significant happened. And then Luke goes on and he says, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write a careful account for you, most honorable Theophilus. Now, here's what you need to know. At this point in time, Luke is not writing the Bible. Luke is simply writing a letter to his friend Theophilus, documenting the life of Jesus that he has carefully investigated. And because of the way that Luke approaches writing this letter to Theophilus, he actually tells us why and how the story of the Bible began. See, the story of the Bible began because Jesus was not who he claimed to be. Let me explain what I mean by that. Jesus actually claimed too much about himself during his lifetime.
Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. Jesus claimed to be able to forgive sins. Jesus claimed that he could bring new life to the world, and then he was killed at the hands of the Roman Empire. And people didn't believe his claims anymore. And the reason that Luke documents the life of Jesus is because the life of Jesus didn't end on a Roman cross. Luke tells us the reason he was a Jesus follower, the reason Theophilus was a Jesus follower, the reason the Jesus movement exploded was because Jesus died, and then days later he was seen again. In fact, there were these scared Christians who were in hiding from the Roman Empire. And after the resurrection of Jesus, they marched into Jerusalem. In fact, Luke actually records one of Jesus' followers, Peter, going eyeball to eyeball with the very people who killed Jesus. And he said this, "You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead. And we are witnesses of this fact." Now imagine the confidence you would have to look someone in the eyes who you know holds the fate of your life and say that. And the reason Peter had that confidence, the reason Peter was able to say that was not because of something that was written, but because of something he saw with his own eyes. And so the Jesus movement, the church, was birthed. But at this point, there's no Bible. And Luke actually continues to document the growth of the church for the next 30 years in a document that would come to be known to us as the Book of Acts. And this movement would ultimately shape Western civilization, this movement called the church. But the question that we have to ask, and if you've walked away from faith, it's a question I think you have to wrestle to the ground, and it's, why so many? Why did so many people embark to write about the life of Jesus? And the truth is because something extraordinary happened. Not something extraordinary was written. That would come later. But something extraordinary happened that needed to be preserved. In fact, Peter, who was an eyewitness of the events, who led the Jesus movement after Jesus ascended into heaven, Peter dictated his account of Jesus' life to a guy called Mark. And there was a guy called Matthew, and Matthew was a Jew. And Matthew's biography on the life of Jesus leverages the Old Testament to show Jewish Christians that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah. So there's Matthew, there's Mark, there's Luke, and then there's a guy called John, the best friend of Jesus. And when John is an old man, John decides to write about the life of Jesus. And someone in the first century might have asked John, well, John, why would you do this? I mean, you're so old. What have you got to gain from this? And John says, well, I want the life of Jesus and the stories I have of Jesus to be preserved. And then John goes on and says this. He said, Jesus performed many other signs. In other words, at the end of John's book that we're getting to, he tells us that he hasn't recorded everything. But he said he did these signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. Now, when John talks about this book, he's not talking about the Bible. He's talking about this document that he's writing. But he says why he's recorded the specific signs that he has. He says this. He says, but these are written that you, that's you watching this video, that these are written that you, are you peeing on me? No, you're not. I thought you were. But these are written that you, and this is you watching the video. John says, these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John is saying that I've written this document in such a way that if you stumble across it in a year, in a number of years, in a few generations' time, because John didn't know how long this document was going to survive, that this document would be enough. That it would be enough for you to trust that something extraordinary happened and you can place your faith in Jesus, which is incredible. Because what John is saying here is the document of John is all you have. The document of John is all you need. Isn't this incredible? That for 400 years, people weren't directed to read the Bible. People were actually directed to read a document that Jesus' best friend John wrote. Now, in a moment, I'm going to let you know where in the timeline of history we're up to, where in the story of the Bible we're up to. But before we get to that point, I want to challenge you to do something after this episode's done.
So we've gotten to the end of the first century. And at the end of the first century, there is no the Bible, but there are thousands of Christians. There's Jewish Christians, there's Roman Christians, there's Greek Christians. There are Christians from all different walks of life, but none of them had the Bible. Instead, they had the eyewitnesses who had witnessed the events. They had stories from the eyewitnesses, and they had partial pieces of the documents. And could you just imagine if maybe someone, your grandparent or your family member, was in a village and they had seen Jesus teach, or they had listened to one of the messages that Peter or Luke or John spoke, and they would tell you the stories. And then one day they came into your village and they said, hey, you're not going to believe what we've got. And then they opened up their backpack, and inside was the document of John that he had written about the life of Jesus. It wasn't the Bible, but it was a biography on the life of Jesus written by his best friend. And that's the challenge that I want to leave you with at the end of this video. I want you to pick a document. Pick a document of either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And then I want you to read it. Now, I don't want you to think in this moment that you're reading the Bible. I want you to think that you're reading the life of Jesus through Matthew's eyes, through Luke's eyes, through Peter's eyes that Mark recorded, or through John's eyes. And if you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it. There is a link in the description below where you can get a free YouVersion Bible app. And so you can check out these biographies for yourself. Now, I totally get that some of you are skeptical, because this is a video where a dude from a church is asking you to read the Bible. And so you're kind of like, I don't know if I buy this. But here's what I want you to know. That as a church, our goal has always been to remove every single barrier that stands between someone and Jesus. And I'm not saying that your questions about the Bible and what's in the Bible aren't important. All I'm saying is they're not the defining pieces of faith and what it means to follow Jesus. So all I'm asking you to do this week is what the very first followers of Jesus did. To start right at the beginning, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Because ultimately, I want you to tether your faith to the event that launched the movement, that eventually produced the Bible. We'll pick up there in the next episode of Beyond at Home. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by the channel. I'm stoked you stopped by, and so are Buddy and Daisy. If you're brand new with us, there is an I'm new link below that you can click on, and you can begin to take your next step on your faith journey. Or if you want to find out more content about this series, there's a link below for this series as well.